the man of the hour here, who's going to be our storyteller. Tell us a story.
All right. I have to sort of set this up a little bit.
Okay.
I have to tell you folks, I'm terribly honored to be invited here tonight. However, I also want to tell you I am a performer and an entertainer. My stories, though they are all autobiographical in nature, are also performance pieces. Sometimes they are created from the childhood photos that I have endlessly kept throughout my entire life because my grandmother and my mother was fanatical about having pictures. So there's pictures of me sitting in bird baths, pictures of me eating lettuce like a bird in the Victory Garden. All right, when I started performing these stories, we do them with slideshows and visual aids. So I have created what I suppose were my feelings at the time that these photographs were taken. And that has become the style that I have built my stories on. So that being said, I am an actor and a performer, and I have built in laughs that are geared to make people laugh, and for some reason, they just need to go right there because otherwise it would be just too much about real life. So that being said, if this little space, that style doesn't resonate the same way, please let me know, because this is an experiment for me. It's somewhat like what we call an open mic. It's a brand new experience, and I don't know that this will translate the same way in a living room as it does in this sort of kind of documentary style, as opposed to a large, flashy, dramatic style. Okay, all right. I'm going to start at the beginning. Every pod is different. I knew from the moment I experienced consciousness that I needed to be an artist, that I needed to take whatever was at hand and make it into something else every time I woke up. Mama used to like to regale all the people that stopped to admire her golden child with the stories of how, from the moment I could muster the strength to climb out of the crib, I would run to the wall, put my hands in my diapers, and finger paint with colors of my own creation, rich earth-toned and pastel colors that I would apply in perhaps gay, omnipotent abandon to my heart's delight. When I was 2 years old, my mama took me to Nana's house in Los Angeles on Hobart Street. She would sit me in the big bird bath, and I would watch the birds eating the lettuce in the Victory Garden. I wanted to be a bird. So Nana changed me, and she put me on my stomach so that I could eat lettuce like the birds. I crawled just closer and closer and closer. I wanted to be a bird. I thought if I could be a bird, I could fly. A little bit of dirt. That's all right. That's all right, I'm a bird. Maybe I'll be able to fly. I couldn't fly. I was disappointed, but I got over it. And then 20 years later, when I was studying theater in New York City at the Actors Studio, the Uta Hagen was telling a story, and I realized that a flock of sparrows had turned me into a consummate method actor before I was 3. So, of course, I gravitated to the theater. Then in kindergarten, when I was in kindergarten, not more than 3 weeks after I started, Mama was called in for a conference. Oh, the first of many through the years. It seems that we were to paint our ideas of heaven. Now, I had pictured me naked, standing in a field of poppies. Mama was standing in the house looking me out the window smiling, and the sun was shining down on me like on ancient Egyptians in days of old. But my favorite part was God up in the corner spitting chocolate ice cream down on me. The school was disturbed. And the schools remained disturbed until I graduated. But then when I was 10 years old, Mama took me and my brothers to the Burbank Recreation Center on Olive Street. Oh, it was a great place. That was where a few years before I had seen the girl who was the best friend of my babysitter next door win the Miss Burbank contest. Her name was Debbie. She was a big movie star now. I was 10 now, and Mama took me there in the summer, and I was going to go to ceramic class. Well, we went into the ceramic class in this big room, and the teacher told us we could make a little pot, a little bowl, or an ashtray. But you know, I didn't want a pot or a bowl or an ashtray. I remembered from being at Nana's house, she had a collection of lighthouses because my uncles were in the Navy. I desperately wanted a lighthouse. So when she was walking around, I started making my lighthouse out of my clay. I made my lighthouse and I shaped it, and then I made a nice roof on it, and I sent it down there, and I put rocks around the bottom of it. And then the teacher worked her way around the room, and she got to me, and she said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, it's a lighthouse." And she said, "You can't do that. You make a pot or a bowl." I said, I want a lighthouse. And she said, "You can't do that. It'll blow up the kiln. It's got to be hollow. It's got to have a hole in it or it'll blow up the kiln." Then she went on to the next victim. Well, she got 2 or 3 people down. There were lots of kids in that room. I was sitting there in my lighthouse. I looked up near the door where they hung the coats. There was a wire coat hanger hanging on one of the hooks by the door. I had taken them apart in my closet at home. I got up, I went and I got the wire coat hanger, and I took it apart, and I went back and I said, "Pick up my lighthouse," and I started poking a hole through it in the bottom. It came out the side, and I fixed it, I put it back together, and I started pushing it through and pushing it through and pushing it through, and then finally it came out the top, and I knocked down the lid, and I had to pick it up, and I had to make a new roof. And then make a new roof. And then the teacher came by again. And she looked at it, and she I said, it won't blow up the kiln. I put a hole in it. And I showed her. And she said, well, all right. Well, it didn't blow it up. And the next week, after it was fired, we painted it, and it got glazed, and I took it home, and I just loved it. And Mama put it on the corner of the bathtub in our bathroom. Well, not too long after that, my father's family came over to visit us from their place near Fairfax in Los Angeles. We lived out in Burbank. Now, my daddy, he was the Jewish side of the family. Mama was the Gentile side of the family. We really didn't pursue either side too much. I mean, we sort of had Christmas. Dad didn't care too much about any of it, really. And Mom had her traditions, so... And Mom was kind of nervous because she was just a little insecure because my dad's side of the family, they had nicer houses, really, basically, and also they were just very elegant, very elegant. So Mom was always a little nervous, and they came over. And my Auntie Mimi had to go to the bathroom, and she came out of the bathroom and she said, Bob, boo boo blah. You got a big schlong in your bathroom. Mom said, that's Doug's lighthouse. Well, I didn't know what a schlong was. Well, it wasn't long after that before the lighthouse disappeared. And Mama told me that she had put it away because she didn't want it to get broken. Well, I want to tell you that, a few years back, after my mom passed, and we were going through all the stuff and everything like that, we found a box. Now, I want to ask you, is this a schlong or a lighthouse? Now, this is a lighthouse.
It's a beautiful lighthouse.
This isn't a
Did you
schlong.
actually do that when you were 10?
10.
I love it.
Awesome.
It's signed. You may pass it around.
That's awesome.
It is signed by me, and it is one of my.
And there's a hole in the bottom.
Yes, there is, which I made with a wire coat hanger.
Indeed.
Now, that's when I started getting the idea about doing controversial art. And I've sort of been pushing that envelope ever since. Because it has a charm, and I have to say, when I went to a shrink for the first time, which was when I was 20, because by that time I had started working at MGM Studios, and I was behind at everything. I want to tell you, school was very hard for me. I finally had to have myself taken out of public school because I somehow just never had any upper body strength. I couldn't climb the rope. I couldn't do the bars. I couldn't do the rings. I couldn't do any of that stuff. But worse than that, I could not defend myself. I could not have any kind of aggressive behavior towards anyone. It just wasn't in me. The hardest thing about being a child was being bullied by I was a toddler and there was a baby in the little bungalow behind us that used to pinch me. pinch me until I bled. And then it wasn't bad enough that he had bullied me. Daddy used to scream at me because I wouldn't fight back. It was difficult. It was always difficult, so I started devising ways to escape. And a lot of my life was spent escaping. Working at MGM, my very best friend, out of a clear blue sky, we're walking along one day, and he says, well, I'm gay. He was 10 years older than I was. I didn't know what a gay person was. They were those two guys that lived across the street with the big French poodle that we weren't supposed to talk to. That's all I knew. They didn't... I went to the therapist because he said, it threw me into a quandary when he told me he was gay. Oh, God. Are you still doing that? I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I told you.
Yeah, you did.
And I found it. I went to the therapist. The therapist, now let me tell you about, I think it was what they call now, I think it was probably a conversion kind of therapy. The text was a book called Homosexuality, Disease or Way of Life by Bergler, I believe. It's sort of after Freud or something like that. Well, Jay, who was a therapist, he used to like to just sit and you'd sit, and his style was to just let me talk and tell stories. And afterwards, he would say a few things like, stuff like this, he'd say, well, you don't clean out your paintbrushes because you're neurotic. She didn't like the gifts because it's a golden gesture. A golden gesture means it has a double payoff. You knew somewhere in your unconscious mind that she wouldn't like it, but you gave it to her anyway. All right, so consequently, she doesn't like it. That's payoff number one. And you're all crushed and disappointed because she didn't like it. Hence, it's what we call a golden gesture. Now, as far as that other thing is concerned, it's called horror vacuma. That's what we call that. Horror vacuma. That means you cannot abide looking at empty space. Sooner or later, you are going to have to find something to put there. And he was right. And then he said, and you have the most astounding pseudo-naivete I have ever seen. Well, I didn't know what that was. And really, I'm glad I never tried to find out what it was. Now that I look back on my rather long life, by the way, I did start going to a therapist again when my wife found out that I was starting to have emotional involvement with the guys, and she felt maybe I should go into therapy again. And I did, and I said to that therapist, who also just liked to hear me tell stories, I said, my other therapist said I had a pseudo-naivete. And he said, well, my goodness, I think you better make that work for you then. Therapy had changed. And so that was the premise I started operating on then. And it worked pretty good. Of course, you know, sooner or later, any system you get is going to turn around and kick you in the ass. That's just the way life is. And it's that way for all of us. because we're just intellectually balancing all the time. And the hardest thing for me in being not antisocial is in the whole way things can just alter by the slightest little thing. The moral compass can completely change. For instance, if you're talking about work. If you're talking about work and something isn't right, people will just look at you and say, well, it's business. That little phrase opens up a lot of dual ways of looking at things that we never think about until it becomes some kind of major news story and the entire world is in a mess. I don't want to talk about the present situations going on in our life right now. So I'm going to jump around to another story, an army story. I had to go into the army. I had to go into the army because even though I was terrified of being in any kind of environment that was too heavy on the testosterone side, I just couldn't stand it. The smoke shack at work, or barber shops, gas stations, anything like that would just throw me into a near catatonic panic. The therapist, the first one, said, well, Doug, I can get you out of that. And I couldn't let him do that. At that time, you see, I had no sexual identity. I had no experience. I had no knowledge of where I wanted to go yet or anything. And at that time, if you got out of the military on that kind of a exit scheme, you were branded for life. And I didn't want that, especially I didn't know what I was. I didn't know who I was. And I screamed at him. I said, no, I can't let you do that. I can't. So I had to join because in those days there was the draft. When you turned 18, you were eligible for the draft, and I was at about 20 years old then, and that's when they were drafting you. And Vietnam was starting to heat up. Now, interestingly enough, all my anxiety about the military, I never even thought about war or combat or any of those things. It was just getting through the process, just living through that kind of communal living and the challenges of getting along in that kind of an atmosphere. So right away, I made some astounding discoveries of how I could survive. We went to Fort Ord when I joined the Army. We were in big barracks, and they had like 5, 6 floors there. And what they used to like to do is have you carry your duffel bag and everything in it, and then have you run down carrying all that stuff for the inspection. And then if you didn't have your shaving cream, which they didn't tell you to bring, you had to carry everything else right back up all the way to the top. And they'd put you through that 4 or 5 times. You know, that was basic training. That's what it was about. And I remember I was doing that, and I didn't want to fall behind. I didn't want to be the one. I didn't want to be the one that couldn't make it. And I remember my hat fell off. We wore these funny hats then. It was before they wore baseball caps. They were sort of tall, sort of flat top caps. And it fell off. And I put down my duffel bag, and I got the hat, and I put it on my head, and it fell off again, and I couldn't get it. So I put it in my mouth, and I picked up my duffel bag again, and everybody was running down the stairs. Nelson, find my wedding ring. Thank you. Keep it. All right. I got to a landing, and there was a sergeant there. And he, sorry.
All right.
And he just looked at me. And he said, "Troop, come here." And I went up to him, and I was so scared. And he just looked at me. And he just took the hat out of my mouth. He put it on my head. And he sort of... And that was the way I got to the Army. They all wanted sons. They all wanted kids to take care of. They wanted people that they would love to just nurture. And that was the way to cut through all of that anger, and that if you were smart enough to figure out how to use it. And I did. It was a matter of survival. And through that period of 3 years, I became more aware that indeed I had a very, very serious gay gene issue. And also, other guys were becoming aware of that in the service also. But we never did anything. We were so terrified. Sometimes we used to meet up in the attics of the barracks and just sit around and drink Cokes and talk about what we would do if we had the freedom to do it, and if it weren't a matter of being branded for life, if we didn't. So we never did. However, by the time I got to Europe and Germany, I got quite a lot of experience off the base, because all those European guys were so much ahead of the game anyway, and they just loved us Americans. And, you know, it's sort of an international language, no matter what country you're in. So that's when that kind of experience happened. But at the same time, that's also when I met the woman that was going to be my wife. And I was very upfront with her, and that's the end of that story. She went, well, that's not a problem for me. Her issue at that time was, this is the way she explained it then, was that she didn't feel comfortable being challenged by other women. However, she didn't mind feel competitive with men, and that wasn't particularly an issue for her. So that was the way that relationship started. And indeed, that relationship lasted for 12 years, and we had a child. And as I had said earlier, at a point about halfway through that relationship was when my man relationship started. And that went very well until we moved to California, and then he got lonely for being back east, and he missed all his friends and his family, and it didn't look like we were going to ever be able to do those kind of things again, and so he wanted to go home, and we were ensconced in California because we had come back to be with my family. So that was, we wanted Laurel to have her cousins and her aunts and her uncles, and so we sort of wanted to live in California. So he left, and the relationship continued for another several years, And then it was time to end that and do something else. Do we need a break? There's too many stories?
Oh,
We can stop.
He's great. He's great.
Carry on.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I'm going to meet Nelson pretty soon now. Well, there was my first full-time, only male relationship, and that was the Hollywood period. Okay, you did. All right. Maybe I should stop.
No, you're fine.
It's been a long 80 years, I mean, I can't help it. It's just a lot of things happen. I'll do another act for you anytime you want. So just tell me when you've had enough, because
Well, we do want to hear about you and Nelson.
okay. All right. Moved down on the White. Moved to Hollywood. Met a guy. He was an actor. Lived with him for 5 years. That's the Hollywood period. That's the period. I haven't started writing those series yet because those stories. Because the thing is, I've never liked name dropping, and you can't live in Hollywood for 5 years with a professional actor and not have a lot of name-dropping stories. I'm going to tell just one from that, and that's because it's the only name-dropping story I'm going to tell, and it's because it had a very big effect on me. All of the actors in my partner's group were professional name working actors. Most of them were not famous, but they were always working. One of them, his name was David Morrow. He had a couple of large roles that you would remember him from if you ever saw the Hindenburg. He played a Nazi war criminal on that. And he was also in BoJack. But when they made the TV series Masada, David was cast as Peter O'Toole's deaf-mute slave. And he and Peter O'Toole became almost inseparable during the shooting of that program. And David was very active in our group. So whenever we would have parties, like any group, the parties are generally the same people over and over again. So it became commonplace to have Peter O'Toole in our company because he stayed with David when he came to Los Angeles. Now, at one of these parties, they used to like to drink a lot more than I ever did. And they were pretty high. And I had gone out to the bathroom. And I worked as a costumer for the Bob Baker Marionette Theater. That's what I did. It was practically, I learned so much. I've always loved puppetry. He was a genius. He was also a monster. Everybody practically made minimum wage. He didn't let people learn. He kept very tight control on everybody, so you couldn't learn as much as you would really like. But it was a great job for me, and it was theatrical without being in any of the guilds, unions, or show business, which I never liked very much. All right, I had to go to the bathroom, and when I came out of the bathroom, I was in the hallway, and they were talking about me. And they were talking about how gifted and talented and creative I was, and why was it that I was not more successful And Peter O'Toole said, well, I don't think Doug would ever do anything much in the business. Doug just doesn't need anything. And there was something about hearing Lawrence of Arabia or the angel from Sodom and Gomorrah saying I didn't need anything. I don't know, it had such an effect on me. I just really never tried anything too much after that, because in some ways, he was right. It's the pseudo-naivete. It's like being detached almost from everything. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, make use of whatever is at hand and drop out. And that's pretty much the way my life has always been. However, I have had to have people to drop out with. Because no man is an island unto himself. And Nelson just supports me. And he can be a little passive-aggressive, but I talk to him about that, and I can be a little bit overwhelming, and I do my best not to be, but we're very happy. We're going to be together forever. That's just the way it is. And, you know, like with all of my relationships, every now and then, you know, boys will be boys and we have little pig piles or something like that. But hell, you know, life is short. So, there it is. We're very happy. And I'm thrilled to have been invited here tonight. It's so different for me than the kind of places that I'm usually telling. And they're wonderful places, believe me. Huge theaters with lovely, wonderful people, and they love me. So I'm not complaining about that. This is just so different. And thank you for putting up with me and listening to me. And I do want to say one more thing. I prepared for this. Once Terry approached me, I read about the dream. I read all of the dynamics. I read about the books that had been written in the 60s that had been influential. I had never read that book. I've never read any of I've read the Martian Chronicles because there's a play about it. And I am familiar with Star Trek because it's been on television. But I'm not overly into that genre because there's so many genres for me. So I got the book and I read it because I wanted to sense what the essence was and why Terry had responded to me. And I put it down to the pseudo-naivete, actually. And then I decided that I wanted to in some way acknowledge that, maybe just subtly, and so I made hematite beads because hematite has long been associated with Mars. And I thought, well, that's it. I'll just make a talisman of hematite. And then I added coral for the red. And that's it. That's the way I prepared. I didn't want to talk about people from Mars. I just wanted to subtly put it there. So that's a trick. That's a reaching to reach people on an other than intellectual level, a spiritual level, a historical level from time immemorial of universal symbolism. If I have a religion, it's probably being a symbolist. I'm a student of comparative religion. I find the essence of universal symbols and am offended by almost nothing. I mean, a swastika wouldn't throw me in. I'm half Jewish, but I do understand that swastikas have been here long before the Nazis were. And I don't necessarily, though I'm not Christian, a cross to me is not necessarily a symbol of death and crucifixion. It's where the spiritual meets the physical. It's another interpretation. It's a universal interpretation. All symbols have a universal interpretation that puts them beyond the silly fighting, planting of flags, and silly symbols that we use just to prove that we're stronger than the other person, or better, or they're first, or to show ownership. But enough of all that. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you. I'm flattered. I'm honored. And I'm tired.
Thank you very much.
Was it okay?
That was awesome.
That was awesome.
It was totally awesome.
Now, if you talked about what you really wanted to talk about, what would you have talked about?
Oh, I would have just put a few more dirty jokes in, probably, or, and there's the New York period. There's all my time as a prostitute. There's a book that was written about me, Bisexual Living. There's all kinds of other stories.
Another night.
Yeah.
May I give you a hug? May I give you a hug?
Well, you may. I'll
Sure.
stand.
You are a human of the first water.
Well, thank you. I don't know what to say. I don't want to.
Don't need to tell us the whole story, but I've got to ask, where, physically, did you two meet?
Church,
The gay church.
Which one?
MCC Ventura, Metropolitan Community Church.
Oh, wonderful.
When I went to Ojai, I had been through the mother experience with my wife. I had been through the father experience with the actor, and I had decided to be a monk, or just a heathen, or something. And I was looking for spiritual enlightenment. So I went to Meditation Mount. I went to a couple of swamis around. I don't remember who they were. I went to a lot of places.
You went hunting.
I went hunting.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Crotona, the Crotona Institute of Theosophy. I ended up as the president of the lodge at Crotona. And Nelson accompanied me with meetings. I was supposed to be a 2-year gig, but they asked me to resign after the first year because I had worn, it was the full moon in May, and I had worn Well, they said I wore pajamas, and they were embarrassed because of the international students they had. I just saw it as sort of Eastern wear. You know, I was just sort of like, they thought it was pajamas.
Flowy linen pants.
Huh?
Flowy linen pants.
Yeah.
Those Dr. Dentons are just such a giveaway, though.
Yeah.
Trapdoor in the back.
It is. That
Yes,
trapdoor.
indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you very much.
All right, you're tired, you've got a long drive home to Ojai, so.
Oh, you're kicking us out?
No, we're not. Stay as long as you wish. You can stay overnight if you want.
No, we do have a long.
I got to work tomorrow.
We do have a long drive to
Oh,
do.
I'm so sorry.
But this has been so much fun, and very exciting, and the dinner was wonderful. What is this?
It's water.
Oh, thank you.
And don't forget to take your cake with you.
Oh, you packed it up?
Yes, Craig is.
White refrigerator.
And Craig will get it for you. Yes.
Oh my. Oh, that was such a surprise. You know, I really don't do too much birthday celebrating anymore. Not that I don't appreciate them. It's different when you're grown up, you know? I mean, I still buy myself presents, but I don't need other people to buy me presents, really. But, well, I got everything I want, basically. Peter O'Toole was right, actually. I don't need anything. Okay.
Thank you for bringing that delightful lighthouse.
Oh, yeah,
I just
the
love
lighthouse
that
is
thing.
great.
So-
I really love that
The
lighthouse.
lighthouse is wonderful.
Oh, I made it at 10.
Great story.
Yeah, when you came in, I wondered what was in the box.